Hello, welcome to the Mindplex podcast. We are here today with David Greene from the EFF. David, say hello.
Hello, great to be here.
Yeah, David is the senior staff attorney and civil civil liberties director. That was the new one that I just saw, and you have been there for a long time. It's really exciting for me to be able to have you on the show and to talk about this very important topic because I'm a big fan. And of course, we have Desdemona Robot. Desdemona, say hi.
Hey there, podcast listeners. Thanks for tuning in.
All right. So, Desdemona, why don't you introduce our guest?
Welcome, listeners. Today on our show, we are thrilled to have a very special guest, David Greene. David is the Senior Staff Attorney and Civil Liberties Director at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, also known as the EFF, an organization at the vanguard of protecting civil liberties in the digital world. David's illustrious career spans significant litigation in both state and federal courts, where he's been a fierce advocate for free speech and privacy rights. But David's expertise doesn't end in the courtroom. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law, where he molds the minds of future legal experts in First Amendment and media law. David was named a California Lawyer Attorney of the Year in 2013, and has been the recipient of the James Madison Freedom of Information Award from SPJ Northern California. We are super excited to have you on the show today. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, Desdemona. And I'm really happy to be talking to you all about TikTok.
Great. And so could you give us a little background or just to sort of set things? We have a lot of different angles to this that we want to cover. There's the unconstitutionality of the ban itself on First Amendment grounds. There's this weird xenophobic angle where they're sort of treating TikTok like they're this Chinese nation state app that's doing more with the same data that all the other companies are collecting, and that kind of angle. And then there was the legislation itself, which was that tacked onto the Ukraine bill, or I wasn't even that's how it got passed.
Yeah, that's how it got passed.
What the hell happened? Fill us in.
It's a good question. I mean, so this is, there's been talk of banning TikTok. It's been off and on for a few years now, and people might recall that Trump, when he was president, actually issued an executive order to ban TikTok and WeChat, and that was struck down in courts. But even since then, and that was struck down in courts because it couldn't be done by executive order; it had to be done by statute. And so ever since then, there's been off and on these. Some member of Congress will stand up there and shake their fist about TikTok and say we should ban TikTok. And they really hadn't gone anywhere. And then earlier this year, in early March, there was a bill that was proposed. It was a bipartisan bill, and so it had a Republican author and a Democratic author, and it was proposed to ban TikTok in its current ownership. The authors of the bill will say it doesn't ban TikTok at all; it just forces it to be sold. But I think that's essentially a ban of TikTok in its current form, current ownership, current editorial policies. And for some reason, whether it's big tech animus or anti-China xenophobia or some perfect storm of the two of them working together, it got a lot of supporters and in the House, and pretty much within the course of a week passed. There didn't seem to be really much urgency in the Senate. There was not a companion bill. The Senate didn't seem to be interested in this.
Right. That's why we were all kind of not worried about it.
Yeah,
they like, it's not going to make it through the Senate.
But the Senate really wanted to pass the aid bill that would, support, have the U.S. providing support to Ukraine and also to Israel. And so there was this big aid, and that was like what they call a must-pass bill. And so the Speaker of the House, they made a deal where they tacked on the TikTok bill onto that. And I think the Senate's apathy towards the TikTok ban wasn't strong enough. They really wanted to pass the 8 bills, and so they let this go along too, and now it's law.
So it's that sneaky thing that they do actually more often than they used to. It happens all the time now, it seems like, where they stick something in on something that has to pass, and then Congress either has to hold up this whole other thing that was supposed to go through. In this case, the Ukraine, and there was some Israel money in there too, huh? That's too bad. And that everyone wanted to vote for that, unless you wanted to be the person that stopped all that in the Senate, then they were they were forced to vote for it.
And you really have to really dislike something to hold up a law that you think is otherwise really important. And I think they were mostly apathetic towards the.
I was just going to say, they don't even know what's going on. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and also, I think that's also the case. You say, look, usually we wouldn't pass like an obviously legally defective bill, but we have to pass this other thing, so we'll pass it and then we'll let it play out in the courts, and that's what's happening now.
David, to kick things off, can you briefly explain the main points of the new legislation that aims to ban TikTok?
Yeah, happy to do so, and I'll do like a high level. A high level overview.
Yes.
So, and not get into the weeds of the legislation.
Minutia not necessary, but really, what the hell is in that thing?
Yeah,
it's hard to know for sure.
Yeah. Essentially, it does 2 things. One is that it makes it says that TikTok within 9 months must sell its Chinese ownership, and if it doesn't, then TikTok cannot operate in the U.S., cannot serve U.S. customers while they're in the U.S., and gives Congress enforcement power against TikTok as an entity, as well as against app stores. So it basically says that TikTok cannot operate and app stores cannot carry it. So that's what it does. It doesn't have doesn't give the government any enforcement power over users, so it can't penalize users who might continue to use TikTok. So that's the one thing it does. And then the second thing it does is that it creates a procedure whereby the president could designate other foreign-owned applications and impose and then impose a similar, you have to sell your ownership, impose a similar requirement on them. But for the time being, the law specifies TikTok and ByteDance and no other entities, but it has a procedure to identify other entities in the future.
So it's a slippery slope kind of thing they're setting up, where it's like, not only are we stopping this, but we're going to stop this from happening in the future.
And maybe you think that's some people might think that's a good thing, but you can think about what's next, right? Is Telegram next? I mean, what other apps that people use and enjoy that might be owned by someone who's
let's set up a process for picking them off one by one, potentially. Just the alarmist perspective. So on what grounds? Because it looks like that they, it's kind of confusing why they did this. And I can't, let's see, it's like
transitioning to national security. Can you discuss whether the risks posed by TikTok are real and tangible?
Well, I can, yes. And so, I can certainly discuss it. So just to back up like a tiny step, there's been 2 reasons that generally over the past few years have been offered by members of Congress and other people who don't like TikTok about why it should be banned. And one of them is that it creates a national security risk. Well, I should say that's the one reason, but there's 2 facets of the national security risk.
Okay.
One is privacy, in that China is using TikTok to collect all this data about US users, and that creates a national security risk. So that's one part.
That the data itself.
Yeah,
having that data on US citizens is a risk. Okay.
And we know very, very little about in what way that's a national security risk. So, maybe it is, but the government really hasn't explained at all how that would be a national security risk. A second and sort of related concept is, does the government not like the content on TikTok? And like for lawyers, that distinction is really, really important, because when you're trying to look at whether Congress's action is proper, you use different types of analysis for if they're trying to address a data privacy concern or trying to address, like, we don't like the content. But we don't really know what the specific national security concern is. Congress has had some secret briefings with the intelligence community. And after those briefings, some members of Congress have said, oh my God, it's so bad. And others have said they didn't tell us anything. That was that scary. So we have very few specifics about the national security concerns. So it's hard to assess whether they're true or not. And I don't have access to the secret information the government has, but all I know is that in court, the government's actually going to have to prove there is a real national security.
But let's pare this down for a minute, because the national security concerns are that the data won't be kept securely, in which case Project Texas, the Project Texas thing addressed that. And now it's like super secure, all in the United States, with United States citizens working in the building, and all this stuff. So it's like that part, it's certainly more secure than all of the data that's being stored by US companies that don't care, that get hacked all the time, that are never held accountable.
Or that sell it.
Or that sell it outright. That's right. And for the most part, will often hand it over when asked by the government. And I guess that part is different.
For $1.
You'll buy
in the sense that the Chinese government can ask at any time for data from a Chinese company, and they would hand it over, as opposed to having a warrant process or something, like we have here.
Well, we
hand it over.
There's a few things I just want to toss in it, but is that one thing is that, so this gets talked about all the time. It's like, you'll hear them say, but China has this legal requirement that Chinese companies must give, the government user data when they request it. And I said, yeah, that's true. But we have the same thing. We have this whole procedure for national security letters, where that you have to give over all this companies have to give over all this user information. There's very, very little sort of due process.
And you can't tell anyone. It's a secret court and all that stuff. Yeah.
And so it's not unusual that governments do that. At the same time, I don't want to discount, I don't know what happens to user data on TikTok. And I know what TikTok says. I know what critics say. But everybody's threat model is different with TikTok, and I guess if some individual's threat model includes China, then they maybe shouldn't use TikTok. But that's not a reason to ban the entire thing, or to say that it creates, that the mere fact of them having a lot of U.S. user data creates a national security concern. Because it seems like there's a lot of people whose threat model doesn't include China. And also, as you said, Lisa, companies, collecting a ton of user data and selling it and being careless with it is that's a problem with every social media.
This is why we need the privacy laws in the United States that we don't have in terms of holding companies accountable. And that's why when the actual sort of security was called into question,
Lisa, let's watch the Project Texas video.
Oh, good idea.
Which is only 2 minutes, but makes a compelling case for TikTok's user data being stored and maintained in the US by United States citizens.
At TikTok, we care deeply about the privacy and security of your data. Our goal is to make our app the most secure social media experience on the internet. Here's how we're doing that. As a US user, when you open TikTok, you're actually entering a protective environment designed to safeguard you and your data. This is where you see videos, where we run the systems that power the For You feed, where small businesses market their products, and where you find and purchase cool new items. To enhance the safety of your experience, we've spent more than $1.5 billion on security to prevent unauthorized foreign access to your data and the systems that deliver you content. The safeguards we're implementing mean that you, as a US user, benefit from an even greater set of protections for your data without any changes to the experience you love on TikTok. Our app is connected to Oracle, a trusted US cloud provider with strong security credentials. The technology that powers the TikTok app in the US runs in Oracle's secure cloud environment, and our plans include appointing other trusted third parties to independently assess the security of the environment on an ongoing basis. If you're a US user logging into TikTok, all your data is stored by default in this cloud, where access is managed by a dedicated team of US employees. This US team is employed by a separate company called US Data Security, or USDS, that will operate separately from the rest of TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance. We've established USDS and are in the process of moving over 1,000 US employees into that company. To provide additional safeguards, our plan is for USDS to report to an independent board of directors who will be American citizens with strong cybersecurity credentials. The whole system is designed to prevent unauthorized foreign access to your data and the software that delivers you TikTok content. As of October 2022, all new US user data is stored in the US as we take steps to delete all historic data. The system protecting US user data will be managed and monitored by US companies. When you compare all of this to the other entertainment and social platforms out there, this data management and security system is truly the first of its kind. You're the reason TikTok is such a special place to find community, learn new things, discover amazing creators, and share your creativity with the world. And we're committed to making sure you feel safe and secure to do that.
All right. So it's very American.
And for cybersecurity folks, they're dressed very conservatively and have clean cut and standard haircuts and everything. I'm impressed with who they've recruited.
Yes. So that whole thing, it's funny. It gets the point across. It's definitely more secure than the other platforms. Whatever the other platforms are doing, they're not doing all that. And then it's got all the creepy stuff. So our friend Larry Ellison, who was the man who wanted to bring you the national ID database after 9/11. Okay. He loves to do these kinds of things with the government. And I'm sure he's fueling the xenophobia because that's what he does. So it's the usual suspects when you look into this deeper. Okay. It's the same people that are always trying to get the government to do these xenophobic projects. For more, I've only been watching for 25 years. Maybe they were doing it before that. I don't know. But I've been watching Ellison since 9/11, this national ID thing, when it was like, oh, Oracle, they like to do government contracts that violate our privacy. I'll remember that. So for them to be in charge of this is funny to me. But the point is they went with what they had because Oracle's a big government contractor. And it looks like ByteDance did everything they wanted and more in terms of that particular threat.
Yeah, and this Project Texas, as far as I know, I mean, I wasn't obviously in on these conversations, but at least the public story is that this would happen as a direct result of congressional pressure, where they were that Shu Chu was dragged into Congress to testify, and they said, "You need to clean up your data privacy. We're concerned about and why can't you wall off you?" And so they went and they spent $1.5 billion to do this.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show you that when Congress just like that, they really didn't want, they weren't, I don't think we're quite being sincere about saying we want you to fix this. They really just want you to go away. So.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to say that, I think what you said earlier is really important, that there's a great need in this country for data privacy.
That clip where Tom Cotton is questioning TikTok CEO Xu Zhiqiu.
Yeah,
he was born in Singapore, received an economics degree from University College London and an MBA from Harvard Business School, yet he is being questioned as if he is some kind of communist spy suspect. Roll the clip.
So, you said today, as you often say, that you live in Singapore. Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
Do you have a Singaporean passport?
Yes, and I served my military for two and a half years in Singapore.
Do you have any other passports from any other nations?
No, Senator.
Your wife is an American citizen. Your children are American citizens.
That's correct.
Have you ever applied for American citizenship?
No, not yet.
Okay.
He makes a note to apply.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm
Okay.
Singaporean.
Let me ask you some hopefully simple questions.
Yeah, not simple enough.
You know, shortly after that happened, I was at a conference and I ended up running into someone who I know who's Singaporean, and I really apologized, like to the best I could on behalf of our entire country, that we had a member of Congress, and this was the second time Cotton has done this, who just refuses
done it
to
lots
believe
of
that
times.
Singapore is a separate country from China.
Yeah, you may be
It's
confused on the
humiliating.
issue. We're not
Right.
sure, you know, but it was pretty you know, it felt like the 50s or something, right?
Oh yeah, have you
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
Yeah,
For-
it was
for one
directly
thing,
out of.
What if he was a
Party.
member of the Communist Party of a Chinese company? Right? It's like it's a Chinese company, but it's got a Singapore CEO. But what are they harassing him about anyway? Right?
Yeah, and I
If he
do
would
Well,
think
be-
that-
I'd love to
if he's
see a
up to
robot country
something,
separate from
he would.
humans, but I think we still have a
Oh,
ways to go
no.
in terms of AI development.
Yeah, don't give her any ideas. So still addressing both of these issues. So I think we've sort of handled the data issue as far as like, no, they haven't told us what's going on exactly. We don't know why. And but as far as the content part of it goes, which is sort of the is sort of the troubling part. What I wanted to, let's see, I'm trying to figure out which thing to go first
Concerning
here.
the TikTok ban's portrayal, could you explain why some view it as a First Amendment violation?
Let's jump right in.
I can. Yes, I certainly can do that. So first of all, I should say that even if it's like motivated by a data privacy concern, it's still a First Amendment violation, or still is going to be subject to like legal analysis under the First Amendment.
Right. Doesn't matter the concern. Yeah.
So either way, because it's a First Amendment concern and subject to First Amendment analysis, because you are, from the user's perspective, right? You are telling users that they cannot receive information in this way they want to receive information, or communicate with each other through this platform that they want to do that. So it's restricting users' ability to get it to both to speak and to receive information. So that's, you know, classic First Amendment problem, even if it's a data privacy, even if it's motivated just by a data privacy concern. And even if you don't want to look at the users, you know, TikTok itself as a U.S. entity also has First Amendment rights. But I agree. I think the users are the more compelling. You know, that's a more compelling First Amendment issue. So, so even if it's a data privacy concern, then we're going to subject this, you know, in the courts, will be subjected to what's called intermediate scrutiny. And you're going to, and the government's going to need to show that they have a real concern, and that this is that this is a fairly narrow way of addressing that concern. And I think that's where it falls apart, because if the concern's about data privacy, then you should pass a data privacy law.
Yay! Which is what they should do anyway. For God's sakes, Congress, pass a data privacy law.
You almost can't think of something less narrow than
Maybe he
banning
needs
an
a map
entire app,
or a
right?
dictionary.
Yeah, and it's also not effective, because if the Chinese Communist Party really wants American information, user information, then they'll just go and buy it from the data brokers who purchases information from, you know, all the other social media companies that have bad data privacy practices. And so not only is this like too broad in that it bans the entire app instead of regulating its data practices, it's ineffective because it really does very little to actually restrict the flow of user data to the Communist Party, because we're not regulating the data brokerage markets. We're not regulating how any other company collects, uses, retains, or shares user information. So even if you're looking at this under what's called intermediate scrutiny, which is a little bit of an easier test,
Yeah.
you know, it's not going to work. So
Engaging deeply into the
content.
First Amendment, can government intervention in social media ever be justified under the First Amendment?
Well, it can potentially be justified. It's just, and so very basically, you know, it's the First Amendment's not like an absolute bar to pretty much anything. I mean, there's always a possibility of government intervention. So we have these various different types of analyses that courts use to determine whether or not this can be sort of an exception to First Amendment protection. And the one I just talked about is called intermediate scrutiny. And very generally, we use that when the government is not responding to concerns about the content of the message itself. And that's why I said this is what's likely to apply if it's really a data privacy concern. If it's a content concern, which I really think it is, and I can talk about why I think it is.
Yes, please do.
It's called strict scrutiny, which is more difficult, which you have to show that this is the least restrictive way of addressing an actual and real problem. So the government has to prove that there is an actual and real problem. So it can't just shout national security and not say anything more. And it's also have to prove that this is the least restrictive way of doing so. And again, banning the entire app instead of targeting your regulation towards a very specific problem is rarely going to be the least restrictive means of doing so.
Right.
And I can also talk about how I think at this point, we're pretty sure this is actually a content concern.
Yes, please do if you think
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So again, as this whole thing's been debated over the past few months, the government kept on saying data privacy has nothing to do with content. But this time around, they've actually been largely admitting that it's at least in large part motivated by content. So we have a few indications here. So in the official House report that accompanied the bill, there's a section called Purpose and Summary. And the official House report says such applications can be used by those countries to collect vast amounts of data on Americans and then conduct espionage campaigns and push misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda to the American public. So even in the House report, which is actually something that courts can consider, that's like evidence that courts can consider it. At least in part, we're concerned about Congress says they're concerned, or that the national security concern relates in part to what they believe is the potential for the Chinese government, to push misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. Again, that's a content concern. It might be an important one.
Well, there's a lack of control factor. I mean, I think it was interesting because when I was doing my research and I was reading the interview with Katie Drummond, she talked about, and it sounded like me too. She's like, I never cared about it until the Ukraine war, because that was when the news started coming out of it, news that you couldn't get anywhere else. And that's the real issue that it seems like what makes this such a First Amendment issue, is because they're banning it. And it's a news app. It's basically become a news app, and a news app for a lot of people that wouldn't get news otherwise.
Yeah.
Things. And so it's certainly one that they have no control over, as opposed to some of the, popular media, the United States media. We're in this bubble. We all say the same thing and report on each other's reports and do all that stuff that we do. So you kind of have to watch the BBC or something that wasn't made here a lot of times to get real news. And with TikTok, you were getting that news from other places for the whole world. And it really, so the official story would be one thing, and then something would happen on TikTok that would show that the official story was maybe not accurate. And that it caught them off guard more than once in that way. And so, especially for something like Ukraine, where there's always been questionable reports about what's actually going on and what we're being told is going on and all that, it's been going on the whole time pretty much. So yeah, talk a little more about how there's really no room for anything if it's about content, the fact that, and that Biden is using it for his election. They're all using it for their elections, while voting to ban it.
Yeah, it's real. And yes, they're all using it for their a lot of members of Congress using it for elections. Of course, they put and this is very, I think, interesting. That originally they said our main concern is about election integrity, which I agree, is actually a really serious concern. Like, I really want the government to do stuff about election integrity. I don't know if it's this. And there is this report that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence report puts out every year called the Risk Assessment. And there's actually a mention of TikTok in the risk assessment. And again, this is how we know that the concern's about content, because it says that, there's malign influence operations and TikTok accounts run by a PRC propaganda arm reportedly targeted candidates for both political parties during the U.S. midterm election cycle in 2022. And then we are concerned that they may attempt to influence U.S. elections in 2024 at some level because of desire to sideline critics of China and magnify U.S. societal divisions and increase their abilities to disseminate disinformation. And so this comes out right at the same time Congress is getting these secret briefings. And so that's why we think, wow, they're really concerned about, like, they want to force a sale of TikTok or ban it before the election. But then when the law actually passes, it doesn't go into effect.
Keep it up long enough to get us elected this year. Right? Then you're out of here.
Which in some ways, an innocent interpretation is, well, it's not realistic. Like TikTok, if they are going to sell, which they've said they don't want to, they're going to need time. And things like that take a long time. But it's also like, well, if we push it past the election, then we all get to use TikTok during the election. Which I think this goes to show, even if China is using it malignly, right? I mean, other people are using it non-malignly and actually in really important ways. And that's why the First Amendment generally says, you don't ban. That's why we want narrow, sort of very targeted things. That's why the First Amendment insists on that type of very, very narrow and specific targeting.
Cool. Interesting.
Regarding the legal fight, what are some potential outcomes of TikTok's lawsuit against this recent legislation?
Yeah, so there's been just recently, just in the past 2 weeks, there's been 2 lawsuits filed challenging this law. One was filed by TikTok itself, and they have arguments both that the law violates the First Amendment. They also have some arguments that the law is what's called a bill of attainder, which is something that is specifically prohibited by the Constitution, which is, and I'm being very, very, very general here, essentially a law that only applies to you, right? I mean, generally we don't have laws that only apply to like a single person or a single entity. So that's not allowed. And so the TikTok is saying this is a bill of attainder. I'm not a bill of attainder expert, so I can't tell you whether or not how the merits of that claim will play out. And then just
but
earlier,
the other suit is on First Amendment grounds.
Yeah, and so there's First Amendment claims in TikTok suits also, but they have that thing because they're named in the bill as well. Just this past week on Tuesday, a group of TikTok users filed a lawsuit also claiming that, again, we talked about this before, not only does TikTok have First Amendment rights,
good,
talk to people and to be a platform through which people talk to each other, but a bunch of users said this affects our First Amendment rights as well. And so they
filed a class action?
No, they just filed a claim on behalf. I believe there's a half dozen of them, of users. But the relief they're seeking is to void the bill. So it would provide relief for everybody. And a similar thing happened. So, people may know the state of Montana tried to ban TikTok in Montana. And we saw the same thing. We saw 2 lawsuits. TikTok itself filed a lawsuit, and then the group of Montana TikTok users filed a lawsuit. And in that case, the judge there struck down the Montana law, both on First Amendment grounds as well as because Montana doesn't have the ability to conduct U.S. foreign policy. And that case is actually being appealed right now. But so we have a similar thing.
That Montana state court? That's federal.
It's in federal court, but it's about Montana state.
Oh, okay, but it is federal, so it could set set a precedent.
I think the important precedent there is that the First Amendment applies.
Yeah.
The Montana law, is that court's only going to tell us what the limits of Montana's ability are. So the federal question could be, about what the U.S. government can do is a little different because the U.S. government can conduct national security, can conduct national policy, foreign policy. But at least it tells us that
Oh.
the First Amendment concerns are real First Amendment concerns.
Right. That a judge, because the judge ruled correctly, as far as we're concerned, on those issues, on the First Amendment issues, which are the same issues in play.
Hearing this summer, and so we'll know a bit more about that in a few months.
Okay, great.
Lisa, perhaps this is a good time to show the clip of TikTok's CEO Xu Zichu explaining TikTok's pledge to fight for our rights in the courts. Roll clip.
Hi everyone, it's Shou here. As you may have heard, Congress passed a bill that the president signed into law that is designed to ban TikTok in the United States. That will take TikTok away from you and 170 million Americans who find community and connection on our platform. Make no mistake, this is a ban on TikTok and a ban on you and your voice. Politicians may say otherwise, but don't get confused. Many who sponsored the bill admit a TikTok ban is the ultimate goal. It's obviously a disappointing moment, but it does not need to be a defining one. It's actually ironic because the freedom of expression on TikTok reflects the same American values that make the United States a beacon of freedom. TikTok gives everyday Americans a powerful way to be seen and heard, and that's why so many people have made TikTok part of their daily lives. Rest assured, we aren't going anywhere. We are confident and we will keep fighting for your rights in the courts. The facts and the Constitution are on our side, and we expect to prevail again. Our community is filled with people who have found acceptance and compassion, offered inspiration and encouragement, increased their awareness, and brought into perspectives, ultimately adding more delight and joy to their lives. Our community is also filled with 7 million business owners who have built their livelihoods on TikTok. While we make our case in court, you'll still be able to enjoy TikTok like you always have. In fact, if you have a story about how TikTok impacts your life, we'll love for you to share it to showcase exactly what we're fighting for. Meanwhile, we will continue to invest and innovate to keep our community vibrant, exciting, and safe. Through our US data security efforts, we have built safeguards that no other peer company has made. We have invested billions of dollars to secure your data and keep our platform free from outside manipulation. I can't say this enough. This extraordinary diverse community is what makes TikTok so special, what makes it matter, and what makes it meaningful. And we'll keep working to ensure you will always have the opportunity, the safety, and the freedom to enjoy all TikTok has to offer. Thank you.
So it's pretty amazing. It's very interesting to have this Chinese media company setting a free speech example in the United States, basically. And it's
what does the
interesting.
process look like for TikTok in fighting this legislation in court?
David, what's the next step in this thing?
Yeah, this is really interesting. So the law did something unusual where what the law says is that any challenges to this law will be filed in the DC and the United States Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit. And so that's unusual. So usually if you're going to challenge the law, you file a suit in the trial court, and then the trial courts are all set up to make factual determinations, and there's all these processes. And then there'll be a finding by the trial court. And if you don't like that, you can appeal that to the Court of Appeals. But here it actually goes right to the Court of Appeals, right to the DC Circuit. And they didn't get the DC Circuit's permission or blessing to do that.
Wait! You're saying that TikTok filed it?
So TikTok and the users, both their lawsuits are filed directly with the Court of Appeals, and which is unusual. And frankly,
how did that even happen? I don't understand how that happened.
That's what the law required, and this has happened before. So way back, way back in 1996, when the Communications Decency Act was passed, there was a provision in that law that required it be directly filed, that the Third Circuit had direct jurisdiction.
Oh, the law that was passed, the ban requires that it be filed in the Court of Appeals. Yeah. Why do you think they want it to be filed in the U.S. Court of Appeals, the feds?
Well, it just skips a step, so it makes you get to the end result much faster. And I think that's why they didn't want this to get hung up and caught up in a trial court. And there's also might be an idea that they wanted to decrease forum shopping, so they wanted to avoid the situation where whoever's going to challenge the law would pick a place where they thought they'd get the most favorable trial.
For the jurisdictional issues.
I think it's generally the speed you get from just starting at the appellate.
It might not be a bad thing that they did
that.
No,
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. And but I don't think the DC, we don't quite know how they're going to handle it procedurally. But I think at some point they're going to have to do some type of fact finding. Or they could just decide that there's a legal issue they want to look at first and look at that. So, I think we'll find out soon how the DC Circuit is going to do with it. Look at this. We don't have a lot of models, though, to look at to see exactly what the procedure is going to be.
For this kind of thing. Okay, but at least they sort of gave it to this important, a court whose decision will have meaning once it's decided. It sounds like that was the point of
and so we will
using the venue.
And so these are the courts. The courts of appeal are one step below the Supreme Court. So this just puts you closer to a final decision more quickly.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Just trying to go through my questions here and make sure we've covered everything, because we really
let me talk about U.S. hypocrisy. I'm happy
How does
to do
this
that.
affect U.S.-China tech relations and broader diplomatic ties?
Yeah, what kind of effect overall do you think this is having on our already strained international relations?
With China specifically?
With China, but kind of with everybody. I mean, it's so embarrassing. The whole thing is so. I often feel embarrassed talking to my friends in other parts of the world, going, "Does it look as bad as I think it looks?" And they're like, "Yeah, it does."
Yeah. So I think this is one of those moments also where you could probably, feel for the poor civil servants in the State Department who for years, the consistent U.S. policy, and to our great credit, one of the things you can be really proud of the U.S. government having done consistently for the past 40 years is to promote a free, open, and secure internet around the world, and to be a steadfast critic of other countries who've tried to ban communications technology, shut down internet channels, or shut down the whole internet at all. The U.S. through the State Department has consistently called out such actions by other countries as undemocratic. And this has been a really great thing, and actually really effective thing that the State Department has done. Just if you want an example, I think I have one I can pull up really quickly. Back in 2021, Nigeria, the Nigerian government suspended Twitter. Twitter could not operate in Nigeria. You might recall that the leader of Nigeria was accused Twitter of that it was full of inaccurate information, misinformation about him specifically, and about his party and politics, and that there was all this malign information from his political opposition, and so he suspended Twitter. And the U.S. government immediately called that out. On June 10th, 2021, the United States condemns the ongoing suspension of Twitter by the Nigerian government and subsequent threats to arrest and prosecute Nigerians who use Twitter. Unduly restricting the ability of Nigerians to report, gather, and disseminate opinions and information has no place in a democracy. Freedom of expression and access to information, both online and offline, are foundational to prosperous and secure democratic societies.
Yes.
The department was absolutely right then. That's an absolutely correct statement.
Yes.
Exact position.
And that's why it's so dangerous.
Underlined.
It's so dangerous, yes, when we undermine our own position, because if the big example, supposedly the example for the world of democracy is doing authoritarian things, like banning apps, then it looks like, the dictators in the other countries can be like, oh, we don't have to do it. We don't have to pretend to be democratic anymore either. Right.
Yeah.
And it makes my heart sink. Like my heart literally sank when I was listening to an interview with Katie Drummond, and she was like, yeah, you'd expect this kind of thing in an authoritarian government.
In
but
China, for example, right?
in China, exactly. So hopefully, I don't know. I just hope they get it together. I hope that they, I hope that
Lisa, any burning
Oh.
questions you'd like to throw into the mix?
Yes, I have one more, because another thing I learned from the Katie Drummond thing was that this whole thing about the algorithm is separate from TikTok. They have the algorithm, and you can buy the company without the algorithm necessarily. They would keep a hold of the algorithm, most likely. They wouldn't sell it. So what you would end up with is some neutered version of TikTok that doesn't even have its algorithm, owned by an American company that doesn't know how to run it anyway.
Yeah.
And they would just launch something else with the algorithm. They would just be a new thing with the good algorithm, probably.
Yeah, and so I think this is, putting aside, moving on from like the U.S. has just its moral authority has taken a huge hit, right?
Yeah.
I do find it like, the people who say this is not, and you saw Shuzi Chu, talk about this in the video, right? That like it's not a forced sale, it's a ban, and that's completely right, because
can you imagine in the United States if the government told someone they had to sell their company
for
whatever reason than antitrust?
We all have recent experience with seeing how a change in ownership of a social media company can really, really change the user experience.
Yeah, without naming names.
Media company. Maybe you love it now and you hate it before, but it's certainly not the same. And that ownership affects editorial policy.
Yeah.
Right. So what we know they're doing is it's a forced sale is a ban on TikTok as it currently exists. So whether that's because the algorithm won't be sold, so we'll have to recreate from scratch how it decides what content to suggest to people, its recommendation system. It will have to start that from scratch or buy a technology for someone. It's not going to be the same. And I don't think Congress wants it to be the same, because Congress doesn't want it to have the information that it's currently today. I mean, they think that's all stuff that's being pushed, divisive material that's being pushed by China, but they don't want it to be the same. So I think the idea that not a ban is silly.
Only divisive, only that kind of material that's coming from United States companies is allowed. So Facebook, I mean, X, the disinformation on X is going through the roof now, because they're practically promoting it, and its owner, who likes to make comments about things, and clarifies things where the clarification is almost worse than the thing that he's trying to clarify half the time. But that's okay. That's okay.
And
that's
to our
America.
listeners, thank you for tuning into the Mindplex podcast. We hope you found today's episode informative and thought-provoking. That's all the time we have for today's episode. Until next time, this is Desi signing off. Goodbye, everyone.
Okay, so that came early. We weren't really signing off yet, but that's okay. Let's see. So wait, I just wanted to finish what we were talking about first.
So it's like it's whatever is left after a sale is not going to be the same thing.
Right. But that's true. But that can be a thing. So it's killing it. It's like when your competitor buys you and puts you out of business or whatever. That's all they're hoping to happen is
and this is like a huge gift to Facebook Stream, Instagram Reels, all these competitor short video services that are owned by companies that Congress also hates. This is a huge gift to them, because even a new TikTok that with new ownership that's going to be a different user experience and have a different recommendation system, it's going to lose users to the big competitors. So if you hate Meta, TikTok is a big threat to them. It's one of the few pieces of competition we see in this field at all. So so again, it's really quizzical about how some of this was out like such big tech animus, and in such way this is such a gift to TikTok's competitors by Congress.
Well, yeah, and it also really highlights this thing that is a peeve of mine. I do talk about it a lot, but it comes up very often, actually, and it's coming up now with AI. So with media in general, as far as the data collection, the data that social media collects, your every gesture, your every move, and that there aren't any laws making them keep that safe, specifically. And we're so used to getting these letters. I just got one the other day, your data's been hacked. It probably wasn't anything, it's also the language. It probably wasn't this. It probably wasn't that. Like, they know it was hacked, right?
But we'll give you a free Experian, account.
Yeah, we're going to give you a credit report.
Experian will never get
for the hack, right? They don't really want these companies to be liable. So meanwhile, TikTok did this whole Project Texas thing to make it secure. Arguably now they are more secure than the American companies. American companies aren't stepping up to say we're that secure too, or anything like that, right? You didn't see anything like that happening when this came out. So it does seem like that and they have a lot of lobbyists too, of the other social media companies. But they couldn't wait for a TikTok ban. So it was somebody's brilliant, evil plot sticking it in the Ukraine bill. It still sort of, gets me every time I hear about it. What can people do? Anything?
Yeah, well, at this point, it's not a matter of like writing a member of Congress anymore because the law has passed. And so it's really just playing out in the courts right now. And, I think for a lot of people, that's a bit frustrating. There's a limited role.
Can't we do a class action with TikTok users?
For the public. Potentially other users could file lawsuits, but it would essentially be, duplicative of the one that's been filed. So,
so it's not a class action.
It's not a class action. So
because
it's not
why? Because why?
Because
you have to be wronged. You have to be wronged already.
Well, when you're suing to invalidate a law, once the law gets invalidated, it's going to get invalidated as to everybody. So a class action, what you're trying to do is make sure that everyone who got hurt gets some type of relief. But when you're just invalidating a law, like one person could do that, and the law would be invalidated as to everybody. So you don't really need a class.
So it would be after the ban, when people have been hurt by not getting their news, that you could do a class action.
Yeah, and class actions tend to work better if you're trying to get money damages from somebody and not just invalidating a law. I don't think that's going to happen. That's going to be for many reasons. We're not really going to be.
It's not going to happen. Okay, so then what the hell? So then we're back to what can we do?
So I think you can. I think actually talking publicly about how people use the service and how and how they find it sort of uniquely, what's unique about it to them. I think that can really sort of help a lot of the sort of public dialogue about this, because in some ways, one of the weaknesses that people who are fighting this have is that there's a perception that all these things are fungible, right? All these social media platforms are fungible. So, and you'll even see this because, other countries have banned TikTok. India banned TikTok. And what the reports say, people just moved over to other platforms. But I think people actually talk about how what is unique about TikTok and why they prefer it over other platforms. I think that can sort of help at least inform our public discussion about these lawsuits.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like what about the business owners that are using TikTok that it's affecting their business? Could there be any lawsuits there?
Yeah,
I mean, it's the government, so
yeah.
you're not going to win.
Yeah, I think in the user lawsuit, there's at least, I'm thinking, in the user lawsuit, there's at least one business again, and so, but again, so the lawsuits are going to happen. There may actually be, there's always, there could be opportunities for, there could be opportunities for somebody to, file sort of supporting briefs, and things like that. But
not going to work.
But
okay.
And that's the way people could be heard. But anyway, you'd have to sort of like get a lawyer and help you do that and things like that. I don't know.
It's not gonna. Yeah, it's more trouble than it's worth, and it might not work.
Yeah.
So
anyway, but again,
as we come to the end of today's episode, I want to thank David Greene for coming on the show. I have really enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you, Desi. Yeah. So yeah, and I'm bummed. So there's not. So that's just make noise as far as what can you do. Just make noise about government censorship. The government censorship that appears to be going on.
I think there's something to talk about, which is we have this bad law. So it's always good to complain about bad laws. I always encourage people, if they're unhappy with what their government has done, is to call their government out on that, even if it's just through PR channels and things like that. If someone really thinks they have like a really, really great story to tell about how TikTok is uniquely valuable to them, something they think that will really make the court look at the stamp and listen, then reach out to someone like me or others who are following the case. We've filed friends of the court briefs in the Montana cases. I expect we'll file one again in these cases. So there might be opportunities for us and others who are going to file friends of the court brief to present stories and things like that. So you should, feel free if you have stories.
Yeah, that's a good plug to bring up the EFF, and the EFF are very good for that. When you have a situation, or it doesn't have to be something bad that happened to you. It could be a fight that they're fighting, and maybe you have a good example, for their amicus brief or something. But they will point you in the right direction all the time. And David, is it okay to give your email address?
Well, let me just say it's easy to find on the
there you go. That's better. So you can write David. I'm glad I stopped myself.
I'll put a tiny bit of friction.
You just never do it. Yeah, you just never fucking do it. So I was like, I don't even know why I asked. All right, great.
It's very easy to find on EFF.org. You can find my contact information there.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us all about this. And I really appreciate it. And Desi, thank you so much for coming on the show. You want to say goodbye?
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, this is Desi and Desi signing off. Keep being awesome.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you next week.